And welcome back to another episode. This is going to be a new podcast episode, and today we are actually talking about video games. We've talked about movies in this podcast, we've talked about music, we played and discussed music, and now we are going to go into an interesting video game, Final Fantasy VII. And here with me today I have Brandon Martin, that has already been a guest on my podcast. So, Brandon, welcome once again, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's amazing to be back, man. I'm excited to get into this with you. I don't think a lot of people talk enough about these types of allegories, and I think a lot of people look at video games in a very negative way, kind of how we had that big movement of just like break all your TVs or destroy your TVs. TVs are the issue, you know. And as a student of cinema and, you know, a big long-term fan of video games, I think that these things have a proper use and proper role in our society and for our consciousness, for us to evolve and to understand deeper mythologies and deeper stories and allegories. And, you know, and there's a lot of hidden messages, a lot of hidden esoteric and occult knowledge in video games. And I also have seen, like, just as a little caveat to what we're doing here, a lot of good studies, you know, that show that, you know, like playing video games in moderation and in a disciplined format can actually be very beneficial to stimulating the neocortex and learning new skills. And I can say this from my personal experience that I've learned quite a bit of the things that I know from things like movies and video games.
Oh, definitely. It's quite incredible. You know, every movie pretty much, I guess, or most movies definitely have contain lots of esoteric content one way or another. And, you know, and so do video games, as weird as it may sound, but this is actually the case. And, you know, the ones we're gonna discuss today are actually a pretty interesting series, the Final Fantasy series, and they are pretty full of esotericism and I guess occulted knowledge. And this is a series that it has been a very long series. I think it started in the late 80s. Do you know how many episodes there have been so far? It's like 16, 17.
Yeah, I think the 17th is coming out this year. So yeah, it's a pretty profound, you know, legacy that they've created, and each one tends to be a bit different than the one previous to it, and they always revolutionize like the game mechanics and the storytelling. And I've always been interested in Final Fantasy myself. I didn't play the earlier ones until after I actually played Final Fantasy VII, which I came across in I think 98. I believe it was probably mid of 98, and then I actually ran across it at my good friend's house. His brother was playing it in his room, and his brother was much older. He was the cool guy, you know. He was like, you know, smoking weed and doing all that stuff. You know, I was like, oh, he's cool. And then and I saw him playing that game, and I just got completely like fascinated with it, and it just looked so amazing. And then I eventually went out and bought it for PlayStation. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII was released in 1997, which is pretty interesting because we see a lot of like really, you know, prolific games coming out around this time, really powerful games coming out in the late 90s. And we can just think back to like The Matrix coming out in 1999. Like there was a lot of revolutionary changes going on then that's taking us into, you know, into 2000s. And yeah, I mean, it was a technological advancement, right? Because it went from 2D. The previous games were all 2D, and then this one came into 3D, right? So that was kind of an evolution in the technology of game playing. So that was one fascination for a lot of people who played a lot of RPGs, such as myself. And I think it even like sold over like 10 million copies, which was something pretty profound at that time for games like this. So yeah, it's a really interesting, and the themes of it, which are the esoteric themes of it, which we're gonna really get into here, are really the subconscious draw, I feel, for a lot of people. It's just that they're not conscious of the things in it, of what they're seeing, and that's why it became so powerful. It wasn't just the gameplay, because it's not just a, like a revolutionary game like you see today or anything like that. It was still turn-based, very basic mechanics when it comes to gaining experience and stuff like that. But it was really the story and the overarching, like, the hero mythos that we find in it, the Gnostic themes, the Kabbalistic themes, the alchemical themes that we find within this game that I feel a lot of people don't really recognize. Now, I will say that currently the game has been picked apart by a lot of people, and you will find some good information out there, especially when it comes to like the Kabbalistic stuff. And I wrote an essay on that like many, many years ago, just like a really small essay. So, yeah, I think a lot of people don't recognize what's in it, even though a lot of people have kind of tried to dig deeper into it, because it's a fascinating story, and it's very attractive to our subconscious mind. And we find out through movies and through video games a lot.
Yeah, and I think that was the same reason why I was kind of drawn to the game, and I actually didn't play much. Maybe I tried it a few times, but it was especially a friend of mine that had the game. So I was actually more interested in watching it and following the story. So it was like this for most video games I have actually watched. And I was never a big video game player, but I was always interested in the various stories, like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 especially. Then Halo, Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, that's how I was as well. Like, stories were my main catch for like movies and stuff like that, and especially video games. So I didn't just play video games just because it's the new game that came out, or just to kind of escape reality, though we could look at it as a part of that in some ways. We kind of want to experience different forms of realities or different stories that could tell us different worlds, where we engage in different worlds, you could say, and we can learn things from that, right? It's fascinating. So it can become a form of escapism, which we do see today, and we do have a lot of video games that kind of manipulate people's dopamine levels just to keep them addicted to it, and it has become kind of an addictive substance and distracting a lot of people from critical things that are important, obviously. But I think there's still a use for it, especially when it comes to training people and getting skills together and developing critical thinking with like puzzle games and stuff like this. And also, like, just to indulge in storytelling. Storytelling is one of the oldest things in the human race. It's one of the things that have always pushed us forward, is being able to tell stories and embellish those stories and make them creative. And I think that's really important for our species to hold on to that kind of creativity. There's a reason why fantasy and mythology and all these things have blurred so closely with reality and been so such a catch for our human consciousness. We like to imagine, and it's a form of embracing and expressing imagination, but combining it with themes that could be potentially real on some level, but also mixing them up with the absolute, absurdity of the unreal, right? So there's a lot to that. But yeah, I think for me, Final Fantasy, it was the big sword that stood out of Cloud. Strife was the main protagonist in the game, and I was a big collector of swords. And also, I was really big into like Eastern tradition. So like it was an Eastern kind of base game, and rather than the Western American, shoot 'em up games. I played like Doom is a good example. I would play that, but it didn't really intrigue me or catch me as much as Final Fantasy did. So I really got hooked on the Eastern themes in Final Fantasy, which is weird because there's a lot of Western themes in it too. Even the characters kind of look Western, like Barrett. He's obviously an African American, the guy with the machine gun hand.
Yeah, the gun arm.
The gun arm. Yeah. So it's very interesting. But I got some information I can go over here with the development of Final Fantasy. So yeah, like I said earlier.
I just wanted to say that this is interesting because it has a more of a kind of sci-fi kind of dystopian background to the story. I could say maybe diesel punk or like this post-industrial kind of vibe to it. So that's also interesting.
Yeah, it does. The whole theme of Final Fantasy is definitely like this dystopia, like post industrial revolution, right? So like the whole thing is that you have this company, this corporation called Shinra, that is siphoning the life force, the Mako energy from Gaia, the Earth, and they're using that to produce technology. And so like the whole idea is it's kind of this theme of capitalism coming in and kind of industrial revolution coming in and being like, hey, we're going to give you all this great technology, just let us do all this horrible thing to the environment for you. So we have the theme of environmentalism running deep in this game, and you have the main the protagonist who actually, he was a soldier. I mean, there's a lot to it, obviously, but he has these crazy memories. He has memory issues, but he was a soldier, and he worked for Shinra. He was what would be called like a super soldier in a way, because he was kind of genetically engineered, and that's another theme of the game, which is like the super soldier programs, right? So we have a lot of geopolitical and military themes going on within the game, pretty immediate when you start off. So Cloud, he ends up being a mercenary. So he quits working for Shinra because he was a soldier for Shinra. And then he gets hired on by a group called Seventh Heaven, or not Seventh Heaven, Avalanche is the group's name. Yeah, Avalanche.
They are, I guess they are what we would call, eco-terrorists.
Right. And they have like these anarchistic kind of themes to it, which I kind of covered in my last podcast with James Cordner, how like environmentalism and like the post industrial stuff like got anarchists involved in this kind of anti-capitalistic movement. And so they do have these kind of anarchistic, like terrorist, quote unquote terrorist, eco-terrorist themes going on within this, because they're rebelling against globalism, which is the whole thing. So you have like the corporations trying to take over the whole world, right? And that's Shinra. Shinra's trying to pretty much annihilate and assimilate everything in the whole world. And so they're rebelling against that. And then they're rebelling against the environmental damages that capitalism is producing. So that's the big eco thing. And what they do is they go out and bomb these facilities, right? So they bomb these Mako reactors. And they're trying to minimize the amount of harm that comes from that. But, just within any kind of, proactive movement like that, there's always going to be some kind of negative consequences that come about when those systems are very intricately connected to the way people live. So we see like how that actually hurts the people when they do that, which is unfortunate.
However,
no, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. No. First of all, I'd say just to give a little bit of the general storyline of the game. You have this, as you said, this Shinra corporation that pretty much owns that whole planet, that whole world. They built this, basically the capital city. It's this megalopolis called Midgar, which is also an interesting name. Obviously, it reminds me of Midgard with the final D that they removed in the game, so it's just Midgar, and it's a city that runs on these Mako reactors that utilize the live stream. That it's basically the life force of the planet. And Shinra is opposed by this resistance group called Avalanche, led by Barrett, which is the African American big guy with the gun arm, the machine gun attached to his arm. And the story starts with this group conducting a bombing operation. They're going to bomb one of the reactors, and so that's kind of how the whole story begins. And it's interesting what you said, because the second operation that they do immediately after that, it actually it was a government rep, and it actually turns into a big false flag that the government then blames on the avalanche group, and in that occasion, yeah, they end up basically collapsing a whole sector of the city, and so this is kind of the beginning of the game. So that already was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point to point out, is the first false flag event, and then we see how the government and the corporations use that to their advantage. They take something that's supposed to be a symbol of rebelling against authority and supposed to be the light for the revolutionaries, right? And it's supposed to be a movement, and they take it and they warp it and they use it against the people itself. And then Avalanche sees how this is being done, and then they get pointed out in the media, right? So Shinra uses the media to propagandize the Avalanche as terrorists and turn them against the people. And this is kind of what has happened to any kind of revolutionaries over time, right? We see how the media gets involved, and they use the publishing companies to actually, propagandize and spread terror about people who are trying to make great change in their society or in their country or in the world, So I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because it's very, very important to understand that. Yeah, the beginning of the game is really caught me, because it kind of has like this spiritual vibe to it, because at first it's kind of, you have the spiritual theme about like Gaia and the life energy of the planet. And then you have this, like, you just go right into this industrial city, Midgar, right? And it's just all, industry, and it's all like almost like steampunk style, not even cyberpunk, just like steampunk style. Everything's just mechanical, and you jump off this train, and then immediately you have to fight order followers, So you jump off, you're an ex-order follower, and then immediately you're just caught in the battle of like fighting against the government, the agents of the state, pretty much. So yeah, I think that's really important to understand too. Like, as we go forward, you're going to start to see the theme of like spiritualism and materialism kind of blurring and blending together. And as you go further and further into the game, it becomes more and more spiritual and metaphysical as you get towards the end of the game.
Yeah, because we'll see at a certain point they leave the city, and we start to see also the other, it's kind of, symbolic probably of leaving the left brain sphere and going a bit more into the right brain as they are trying to find their balance.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. I never thought about it that way, but that's true. That's kind of what I was correlating it to. You're kind of leaving the mechanics of the world and then going into nature, because as you do leave Midgar, you just end up exploring kind of an open world style game, and most of it's just like nature in general. You have to go to these cities and stuff like this, but you're just mostly out, exploring nature itself. So yeah, you're definitely going into the right brain theme. So, one thing that I'll bring up here is that the main protagonist, Cloud, his name symbolizes air, right? So it symbolizes the air element. So Cloud obviously represents air, but it also can bring rain. And as we see his story progress, he has a lot of baggage, you could say, a lot of trauma, a lot of issues that he's bringing with him psychologically. And we see that with each character in the game, that they always have some kind of background that is circling around some kind of loss or trauma. Barrett has the background of losing his best friend, and later on his best friend does return, and we see the contrast between the two. He and Barrett ends up raising his best friend's daughter, Meryl, I think is her name. That's off the top of my head, but One of the things about
Marlene or
Marlene, that's what it
Marlene.
is. Yeah, it's Marlene, not Meryl. It's Marlene. Meryl's from Metal Gear Solid.
Right.
Yeah. So, and with that though, Barrett actually was a miner. He's like one of the working class, right? And him and his buddy kind of got duped into allowing Shinra to come in and actually do these to create these Mako reactors in their area, and they kind of got duped into it by the lies and the manipulation of the corporations and the state. And this is what kind of sets Barrett off on this revolutionary goal, is because there was an incident between where Barrett and his best friend, they both lost their arms, but he thought his best friend died in some kind of catastrophe. Do you remember exactly what happened? I just remember there was some kind of event with that. I can't remember.
I don't remember. I don't exactly remember, but
right.
Yeah, I remember,
you remember
the
what
story
I'm talking about.
Between those two. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he ends up taking his best friend's daughter. But the point is that's what leads Barrett on his pathway to, revolt against Shinra, because there was some kind of environmental and some type of event that takes place in his past where he lost his best friend. It destroyed the mine. Lots of people died, and all this stuff. And so there's always like this background, right? And Cloud has the most cloudy background, which is interesting because you don't really understand like who he is, because he has these memories of kind of like an alternate life, and we don't really get a grip over like his whole character until way later. We just know that his memories are not to be believed because they are, at first you're like, oh, these are all his memories, and then we start to realize that, oh, this is actually talking about a different character, and his name is Zach, who was the soldier who was in there. But we also have the main antagonist of the game, which is Sephiroth, and he was always my favorite antagonist of all time. Like, he's the coolest, long silver hair, super long sword, black cloak. Like, this guy was badass, when I was a kid. I loved him. And he's seen as the most powerful, soldier as well. So he's the highest ranking soldier in the Shinra kind of elite
the elite unit.
Military. Yeah.
Actually, soldier, it's the name of the elite unit.
Right. It's really interesting. So Cloud starts to have these visions as we play this game, right? And he's, like I said, he has these like flashbacks, right? And these are of his time as a member of Soldier. He keeps seeing Sephiroth in this, and it kind of represents the aspect of his dark psyche in one way, on one level, like his shadow self, which is really interesting. And he has to confront this in order to reach a state of like enlightenment. So the whole idea here is that there's a hero myth going along with Cloud, where he comes from the darkness. He comes from this like really clouded area in his life, and he progresses forward through this turmoil and this trauma, and he has to conquer his internal self and his internal demons, and then simultaneously fighting these demons in the external world. And this is kind of the overarching Gnostic theme that we see in this, which is progressing out of chaos, out of internal chaos, and out of trauma into a more enlightened and more stable being, and more knowledgeable being and productive being for society. And at the beginning, which I'm sure you're familiar with, he actually doesn't really care about anything. He's apathetic. He doesn't care about he doesn't care about the environmental issues. He doesn't really care about Shinra to that high degree. He's just doing it for the money.
Yeah, he gets hired by Avalanche as a mercenary. So because supposedly he's an ex-soldier. So
yeah, I think that's like a really fundamental part that stood out to me. It's like, oh, this guy, he's an ex-soldier, and now he's just a mercenary for hire, and he's just doing whatever job pays the most money. And we see that a lot with a lot of ex-soldiers in our real world, is that they'll just go out and try to find work wherever they can. But over time, he starts to develop a connection to all of this, and we can see that he does care, as he starts to build more connections, especially with the two characters, Tifa and Aerith, in the game. Not only do we have the Gnostic themes of self-transformation, of, coming into enlightenment, and overcoming some great internal or external turmoil or great conflict that's taking place, but we have a lot of Kabbalistic themes going on. We have Sephiroth, right? He's the main antagonist. He's the main enemy to Cloud, and he kind of represents the polar opposite of Cloud in the, he's the oppositional force in the game, obviously. And his name actually comes from Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is the Sephiroth. And that means the emanation. So we see right off the bat that there's already a Kabbalistic theme going on within this game. And, the Sephiroth are kind of these vessels of the tree of life. They're emanations of the tree of life. And they each have different aspects to them, right? And Sephiroth in the Kabbalistic tradition, Jewish Kabbalah, could also be looked at as the main character that's created by the Ein Sof or the Ein Sof in Kabbalah, which is like the divine light or the God. He kind of represents Adam Kadmon, and so there's these spheres on the tree of life, and the bottom 7 spheres represent fractured versions of that light, kind of like they're vessels. They're vessels that hold the divine light within them, but the bottom 7 kind of represent the material world in many aspects of the Kabbalistic tradition. And so we see this whole, theme of Kabbalah of kind of raising out of darkness into light, or raising into, a higher being by conquering these things. And there's a huge, the whole thing, I don't know if you've ever heard this from it, but we also have the theme of reunion, right? The whole idea of reunion. So if you study Final Fantasy, there's Final Fantasy Reunion, and we hear this throughout the game in Final Fantasy VII a lot. Reunion with Gaia, reunion with the Earth, or we're trying to make the reunion. We keep hearing Sephiroth in the game say this over and over and over, and his whole theme is that he's trying to reunite himself with the planet, but he's trying to do this in a way that he becomes the god. He wants to completely assimilate everything. So we have 2 antagonists. We have Shinra, and then we have Sephiroth, right? And this is kind of how it goes. We could look at Shinra just as the capitalistic theme, but then we look at Sephiroth as the ultimate idea of man trying to be God, right? And Sephiroth himself is kind of a genetic deviation from Genova, which is this life form that came from this asteroid. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but and Genova obviously is a reference to Jehovah in the Jewish tradition, right? So it's the name for God, or Yahweh, or Yod He Shin Vav He in that tradition as well. Yehoshua. So we start to see all these religious themes within the game, right? So there's a lot of religious themes running around with this, and Sephiroth kind of is the apex of that.
Yeah, he's got the sort of a next level god complex with respect to Shinra, and that's kind of the corporate monopoly villain. And a further level with that is Sephiroth, which actually wants to become a divine being and the supreme god of everything, while at the same time annihilating everything. So
yeah, including the capitalists that created him, pretty much.
Yeah,
so it's really interesting. So going back to that reunion thing, there's a lot to this, because the reunion involves merging with the planet and becoming one with all living beings. So just annihilating all existence pretty much, and just becoming one being. And this concept in the Kabbalistic tradition is very similar to something called the Tikkun Olam. And what it involves is repairing the world and restoring the original harmony that existed before the fall of humanity. So in the Kabbalistic tradition, there's this huge idea of the fall of humanity, and that's what the the fractured vessels are on the bottom end of the tree of life is supposed to represent humanity, and their whole goal is to raise the humans to a divine state of being by reunionizing themselves or repairing the world so that they elevate into a more divine place. And it's interesting because we have this place called Seventh Heaven in the game, right? Which is the bar, which is where Avalanche meets up at. That's their secret society, right? So the Avalanche does have this like secret meeting, secret society theme going on with it, where they're behind the scenes, you know, organizing and kind of carrying this knowledge and then trying to go out and seek and do proactive things against the government. And but the seventh heaven actually represents this idea of going up into enlightenment, because in the Kabbalistic tradition, there are 7 versions of heaven depending on where you are supposed to be placed in heaven. So the 7th heaven is actually where the gods and the seraphim, which are the angels, the 6-winged angels, are supposed to stay. That's where they're at. Okay, so that's where God and the seraphim actually sit at. So it's really interesting because at the end of the game, not to jump ahead too much, but Sephiroth, as the final boss, he turns into a seraphim because he has the 6 wings. And so he does actually reach that 7th like stage of heaven at the end there. So it's almost like the game almost is kind of like anti-Kabbalistic in a way, because it's almost that they're trying to say it's the Gnosticism that is supposed to overcome this dark Kabbalah. Maybe because in Kabbalah, there's like this dark aspect to it, which is called Klipoth, the dark side of Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic, right? The inverted tree of life. So that's how we could look at Sephiroth, right? And it kind of reminds me in a way of like, Marvel in a way with the Infinity Gauntlets and Thanos, because he has this great idea of restoring the world, of restoring the universe. And
through depopulation.
Yeah, through depopulation, right? So it kind of reminds me of that. So
and that's interesting because there's a tree. I think there's a tree. Like a sacred tree but I think it's in Final Fantasy 9, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, well, Final Fantasy 9. Not to like jump off the main thing here, but I'd say like Final Fantasy 8 and 9 are all very, very connected. Because there's always this theme of like, and 10, we can use 10 as an example actually, and 9. So there's a theme of the planet being in jeopardy, right? And then there's a theme of like a life force energy going on, which is like the life stream, right? So like in Final Fantasy X, there's this, there's what's called the original sin, and there's this imposing artificial god, which is called sin, and the heroes have to combat that. That's the same thing that's going on here. It's just that they're more blatant with the religious theme there. And then there's like the spiritual aspect where they take the energy from the planet and it crystallizes into spheres, is what they call it in Final Fantasy X. In Final Fantasy VII, it's the life energy that crystallizes into materia. So the materia is the alchemical, substance that you work with. This is where you can equip this materia, and then what it does is it gives you the control over elemental powers such as lightning and fire. So it actually is espousing this mythological idea that man can govern the elements of nature in many ways. And we see that through all fantasy games where we're like trying to play God with kind of like having the Zeus lightning bolt and throwing it, obviously. So that is a big theme of it, but it's like we're siphoning the essence from the earth and converting it and using it to make us more than human, more than what we would see as normal humans. So they turn it into a technology where each being can wield, elemental powers. And I think that's really important to understand with that, because it is man trying to play God. So there's like this overlapping of like, how far can you push it? Do you go to Sephiroth, or do you stay like at the level of kind of Cloud where he understands his place in nature eventually?
Yeah, They either, can harmonize with nature and use it for a good use or for self-defense, or they can, be like, Shinra and, and Sephiroth. So use it to destroy and dominate.
Absolutely.
So that's quite interesting about the ability to wield the elemental powers with materia. So
yeah, it was cool you brought that up with the Trinity and Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX was really good. I really enjoyed it. They kind of went back with the play style, like the characters. That they went to something that was more previous. Because Final Fantasy VIII transitioned into like characters that were more adult themed. There were bigger characters. There was a lot to that. Maybe we can get to that later. But I kind of want to jump back to the Genova project a little bit. So this project was introduced by Shinra, and it is, and this is, based upon this meteor that hits the planet, and there's this alien, the alien organism, and what they do, this guy Hojo, who represents the top scientist, the scientismist pretty much, and he's the mad scientist, right? That's literally what he represents, is the mad scientist. He takes the cells and he injects those into human subjects. And this is where we get like Sephiroth and Cloud, and they're trying to use this as a means to create super soldiers. So this is the idea of creating like, Superman, right? The Ubermensch, or Ubermensch, I think is what they call it. So that's also the Kabbalistic kind of theme of the golem. So in Kabbalah, we have the golem, which involves creating a living being out of inanimate matter. So the golem is often depicted as a servant or protector, just as Genova Project is designed to create a powerful weapon. So their idea is to create this huge, powerful weapon, and that's what the golem is supposed to represent, is like creating this huge, powerful weapon out of material that we find from the earth, like clay or something like this, right?
Yeah, that's somebody else's control. Somebody else controls. So.
That's right. That somebody else controls. So there's so much with the Kabbalistic theme that goes on with it. The Ein Sof, just to kind of re-clarify on this, the Ein Sof in the Kabbalistic tradition refers to the infinite, unbound nature of God. So like I was saying, it's the infinite light, the divine light, or the God itself, and it's the highest level of existence, which is beyond human comprehension, right? That's what it kind of represents in the Kabbalah. And there are several references to this concept, particularly, like I said, in relation to Sephiroth in this, because he kind of represents that aspect, because the Ein Sof creates Adam in the Kabbalah, and then Adam kind of represents this idea of Sephiroth. And the Ein Sof creates the tree of life, and then Adam also represents the tree of life, the man. So there's a lot to that when you start to dig deeper into the Kabbalistic tradition and looking at the Kabbalah. And now that I'm thinking about it, it almost makes me wonder if some of the themes in this are truly like anti-Jewish, like or anti-Semitic, because it almost seems that way, but then there's also a lot of positive sides to it, and that's why I kind of pointed out, like, they're probably speaking out against the dark versions of Kabbalah, but it is coming from a Japanese creator and Japanese producer and company, Squaresoft. So I wouldn't put it past them to have some themes of that reject some of the Western ideologies, obviously, which is kind of interesting too, to jump onto the super soldier thing, because we have Cloud, who is a blonde hair, blue-eyed individual, right? So he's blonde hair, he's blue-eyed. So, we do get this like kind of Aryan kind of theme running with that too. So it's like this mixing pot of all these different world ideologies and religious and occult traditions, because there's a lot of occultism that we're talking about here.
Yeah, it has obviously, being a former super soldier, with the blonde hair and blue eyes, that makes you think.
Right, it does.
Yeah, so
I know. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
It's kind of funny.
I wasn't aware of the possible. I mean, now that you say it, it could make sense for me, but I wasn't aware of the possible, anti-kabbalistic, so to speak, theme. I did see the opposites, the Kabbalah and its clipotic counterpart.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way. I mean, when I first played the game, obviously, I didn't know anything about Kabbalah, at all. So when I heard the name Sephiroth, I was just like, that's a really cool name, And then as I started to study Kabbalah in my late 20s, I was like, man, my favorite video game has a guy named Sephiroth in it. And that's a direct reference to Kabbalah. So I,
Yep.
started digging into this. And obviously the Tree of Life, which has the 10 Sephiroth in the Kabbalistic tradition. And these are pretty much attributed or you could say emanations, through God's creation, right? Like what God is creating or the universe itself. And then we also has the Norse themes, right? So you had brought up Midgar, which is just one letter off from Midgard, right? And that's a Norse place that represents the physical or material realm, so that's a Norse mythological thing. And then as you get into it more, we have the summons, and we summon these giant creatures. And one of the creatures that we summon from in the game is Odin.
Yes.
That's right. True. So there's a lot of like Norse mythology, not North, but Norse mythology within the game. And we see that, like this is just more examples of that mixing of all these traditions.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Obviously, the fact that Midgard represents the material world, because that's basically probably the materialistic imbalance that we find in this out of control, huge megalopolis. That it's Midgar, and polluted and overcrowded and.
Yeah, it's so true. I didn't think about that. It's like a prime example of the allegory against like absolute materialism,
Yeah.
The obsession.
And it has a system, it runs sort of in a circular system, and that goes upwards. Like you have the sort of the best living quarters that are above the slums, basically.
Yep.
So that's where all the higher ups incorporate where the corporate kind of world is, and the corporate class. And then you have the slums that are below, and they can't even see the sky because it's blocked by this sort of these plates, these roofs that they have above. So
yeah,
kind of very oppressive. It builds up a very oppressive atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a very dark atmosphere.
Yeah, and also, again, as we said, pretty despotic with all the example that they have the trains, that they have this ID scanners. So they check everybody's identity and background. And if they find something that, doesn't check, they immediately send their other followers on the train. So
yeah, it's so true. I didn't even have that in my notes, but that's
quite interesting.
It's a powerful spot. They're
and I mean, it's not even. Yeah, and it's not even fantastic, or it's pretty real. So
yeah, that's totally a reference to what's going on, and they have that going on in Japan, because Japan has the leading, most revolutionary public transportation system. That's where most people go. They don't really drive so much over there. We have these crazy, public transportations. They're trains, so we can see a reference there of correspondence to their own society. And like you have to have these passes, like they have the passes there, and they do check those passes. And if you don't have your pass, they will, take you in or kick you off the train or fine you, for trying to, use the train without permission and stuff like this, So
yeah, not to mention what happens in China with the real time, facial recognition and ID profiling.
Right. Yep, that's true. Something that came to my mind as you were mentioning that was just the overall disposition of the public on the train. Like when Barrett is walking through the train after the whole event of the seven slum, sector 7 is what it is. That's the slum that gets destroyed after they bomb the Mako reactor. And everybody's blaming Avalanche, and then we see like this business guy who works for Shinra, obviously, like complaining about Avalanche, and Barrett, how much resilience and how much kind of discipline you would have to sit there and listen to somebody like shit talk you when you knew that it wasn't you who actually did all that it actually was the state. And that whole like just dynamic of like showing that dichotomy between people who are in the know and people who are not, people who are just blindly serving the corporate overlords and the elites, and we kind of get this as being awakened beings. Like we walk around every day and then we hear people like talking trash about anarchism, or talking trash about anybody who's proactively standing against the state, and then they're blaming it on us for the conditions that the state has actually created, so
blaming the people that don't comply and don't go along and resist. So
right. So what's more repugnant is the idea, like, maybe it was fucked up that they did do a terrorist bombing, but yet what made that necessary is actually the issue. That's the real issue that people need to be focusing on, and they always warp that. And that just came to mind. So since we're on that topic of the anarchist kind of thing, like some of the themes that I see in this is, first of all, like the anti-corporate theme, right? So like we do have this whole like anti-corporation. One of the main antagonists is the Shinra, the electric power company, right? So it's like the control of electric, right? So they don't have Tesla technology, even though they have this ability to use all this, energy and magic and all this stuff. But
the control of it's the control of energy basically, and the creation of scarcity. And
absolutely. So we see that today, in our real world with the monopoly on electricity, And so that's one of the biggest things, where the companies are, exploiting the planet's natural resources for their own political agendas and to enslave the population. And then, like, as we said before, we have the environmentalism that's going on within it, which I would be very cautious about that, because it can take you into actually promoting more state. But there is an aspect of anarchism that deals with environmental issues, like, one of the reasons why we're suffering in the environment that we're in and creating worse environments is because of the state, So like, as an anarchist, I am at some level a true environmentalist, because I want to protect my environment, but I'm not going to go to the level that I'm going to advocate for more state control, So that's there's a big difference there, because most environmentalism is now wrapped up in like left-wing politics, obviously. And we see Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and all the green movements and all this stuff. And it's like, you got to be really, really careful about how you're applying solutions with that. The other one is just the absolute rebellion against forms of authority, which goes along with the anti-corporate themes, So obviously the idea of like Cloud himself is completely anti-authority. He's almost nihilistic at the beginning, right? He's completely apathetic and nihilistic, which it can take you to that level where you just don't care. Like, you become such a rebel that you just don't care. He kind of did represent like a punk too, because he had the spiked like shoulder pad, and he had that kind of punky theme to him, maybe
spiky
like
hair.
Yeah, spiky hair, grunge kind of punk themed going on with him, But the other thing that I really find that was important is kind of the emphasis on mutual aid. So the characters in Final Fantasy VII like really form a strong bond, and work together and try to help people, even the people who are talking trash about them, who think of them as the enemies. They're sacrificing their own needs for the greater goal that they have to create a better world. And even know that the people like I said that are against them, they still help them, because they understand the condition that they're in. And this can seem very consistent at least to me, with anarchistic ideas of like community importance and working together and like I said, mutual aid. So I think those are some of the important themes that people could, because a lot of people will probably be like, oh, there's no anarchist themes in that. And I'm like, well, you don't understand anarchism then,
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because as basically as soon as you get out of the city, of this big conglomerate, and you go into the smaller towns and some other smaller places, but especially the smaller towns and villages, they pretty much look like they're abandoned. They've been abandoned by most people that obviously, went to find employment probably in the big city. But the people who are still living there are actually, more into that, mutual aid mindset. So they sort of manage to scrape by, even though the place is sort of, there is this decadence and sort of, post-industrial kind of thing, with these little decadent villages, because every resource and every able-bodied or more able-bodied person is being attracted to the big city. So
yeah, it's almost kind of like going out to rural areas somewhat in a way, and then technically it would be a rural area. It's just like small villages. Everybody's getting along. They have their own systems. They have their own communities, and this is the entire and also the roads seem to be not there either that go to these villages, right? The roads are gone. So it's like they're trying to disconnect them from and just completely starve them out. But in spite of that, they actually survive and
because
prosper.
because obviously, they manage to survive and get by until, the other followers usually show up. So we see that in the game also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's interesting that, it seems that, Shinra has all this control over pretty much all the planet because they can move around and, do their raids even in the villages and stuff. So, however, it seems that, as I said, the people who manage to, not to get sucked into this crazy life in Midgar, they actually have a more free, life, even though they have to give up some of the comforts, quote unquote, that they might have in the capital. So that's interesting also,
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very important to learn from in many ways. So another thing I'd like to bring up about the Kabbalistic tradition, to kind of go back over a little bit, is that Tifa and Aerith are actually a reference to Sephiroths in the Tree of Life. So we have the circle, the emanation of Tifereth or Tiferet, depending on how you spell it. Okay, and that's where Tifa comes from. So Tifaret, Tiferet, is one way of spelling this emanation. And then another way of spelling it is Tifareth, Tifereth. And if you combine that with Tifa, Tifa, that's Tifa, the beginning of Tiferet, and then Aerith, Aerith, Tifereth, Tifereth. So it's right there that both of them actually represent that emanation. And what does that emanation actually mean? It's the vessel of beauty, compassion, and balance.
Yes.
And what do? They balance Cloud in this in this game. So Cloud has to lean on both of them, right? So Aerith becomes more of the love interest to Cloud, and Aerith is the being. She's the ancient being, right? She's the
last survivor of this race that they call the Ancients.
Right. And so she has a direct connection, a very intuitive connection to Gaia, an extreme energetic connection to it. And she has like premonitions, and she has a lot of insight, lots and lots of deep insight. And then you have the opposite of that, which is, so Tifereth and Aerith kind of represent the two sides of that emanation, you know, and they both serve to aid Cloud on his journey, especially Aerith in many ways. And you don't meet Aerith till way later, but yeah, so I thought I would point that out, like that spelling. I think that's really important. And then another thing that I had noted is that Tifa's birthday is May 5th, or no, May, which is the 5th month, and it's the 3rd. So hers is May the 3rd. And if you actually take her name and you put Tiferet in like a gematria calculator, right? So gematria is a form of numerological understanding from Kabbalah, actually, if you look into it. It's a Kabbalistic numerological breakdown. And if you put that in, the result that you get, the value that you get is 305. So May the 5th, or May the 5th month, and then the 3rd day of May is 503, but it's 305. So, you know, whether that's intentionally done or not, there is a correlation there. I think that could be synchronistic, where you have, you know, Tiferet actually represents 305, and her birthday, Tifa's birthday, is May the 5th month and the 3rd day, you know. So I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was great, man. I haven't, yeah. I know it had, you know, I know the game had Kabbalistic themes, but, you know, I didn't know this about, you know, Tifa and Aerith, that they actually formed Tiferet. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought that would be good to bring to the table, and
yeah, absolutely.
I just discovered that today, actually, like just a few hours ago before we were coming on, and I was like, wow. Oh man, I got to bring this to the table because it's so important.
Yeah, they're sort of the sacred feminine aspect of the game, basically.
Yes, they are, absolutely.
Even though what's interesting is, you know, they both are able to hold their ground, you know, in battle and in self-defense. So with Tifa,
I was about to say that Tifa is the fighter. She's the fist fighter. And then Aerith is the opposite side of that, because she uses the magic. You know, she doesn't fight with her fist. She fights with the magic.
Has a rod or a club, like, or a staff.
Yeah, so she can't beat them down, but that's her main thing is magic. Yeah. And Tifa's the fist fighter, you know, get in your face. She's kind of a punk too, right? She wears kind of the punky, you know, skimpy outfit, you know, more black and white theme, you know, and gray themes. And then Aerith is more of the traditional girl with the dress and the long hair and, you know, the flowers and all that, right? So when we first meet Aerith is at the beginning of the game with Cloud in Midgar, and he's on the streets, and she offers him a flower, and you have the option to take the flower or to deny the flower. If you take the flower, there's some other, you know, stuff that plays out in the story later on where you can give that flower to Tifa later, or you can give it to the child of Barrett. And depending on who you give it to, you get different kind of you know, dialogue from that when you get to choose that. So it's just kind of interesting because she does represent the flower like Aerith does. And then we also have the idea of air, you know, being associated to Aerith as well. So the element of air, and she does kind of remind me of that. She has like the airy wisdom in a way, because she's always there, like trying to kind of, because Cloud has this exterior of being a hardhead, right? Like he's extremely stubborn, you know, and he's in strife, you know, he's in that's why they call him Cloud Strife. He's you know, he's clouded in his mind. He doesn't have all his recognitions of who he is, his memories. He's clouded, and then he's in strife. So he's in turmoil. He's in chaos, you know. And she kind of like tries to balance that with her natural force. You know, she's trying to bring to clear his mind. She's trying to bring clarity to Cloud. She's trying to clear the storms out of his mind, you know, like as they start to progress through the game together. And so you end up playing with Aerith later on in the game, and you end up at her house, and you know, and
you know, it seems that the places where she's at, like her house or the church where she's she grows her flowers there, but the flowers seem to grow also around her house. So, and it's kind of I think they say that's the only place where they can grow in Midgar.
Right, it is. That's correct. The two places that she goes. And then you brought up the church, and I think that's kind of interesting because the church is absolutely in ruins, and obviously nobody goes to the church. So that's kind of like a depiction of Western Christian doctrines as well, like we do. It's kind of however you want to put it. I don't know if it's a positive theme, like saying, hey, this is where the light is at in the church, because that's where the light shines through that allows the flowers to grow. You can look at it in many different ways, but I think that there is some symbolism there that's being brought to the forefront about, he falls into, because he, on their final Mako explosion, he actually falls down, and that's where he lands, is in the bed of flowers, in her bed of flowers. And he falls through the roof. And then she's a little upset that he fell on the flowers, but obviously she's just picking on him. But it's in that church, so I think that that's a Christian theme that's going on within that. 'Cause you don't really see a lot of stuff about the Christian theme, but there is a little bit in there, obviously. So Aerith also is sacrificed by Sephiroth later in the game, so she actually becomes one of the main characters that dies. And that was the first time that I ever cried during a video game, was when she died. It was like, damn. Yeah, I was like, damn, that was heavy, And she gets stabbed by Sephiroth, and she returns to Gaia with this. Some people, like, there's some, a little bit of non-esoteric knowledge here, but some people have figured out ways to keep her in your party after this. They figured out how to hack it so you could keep her in the party. But I look at that as the sacrifice of the sacred feminine, and she dies in this like giant plant like place. It looks like a immaculate, like crystallized plant in a way, but she dies in the middle of it. And it's kind of like a sacrificial ritual from the dark occult in a way, to further everything. So I think she kind of represents also the polarity of Sephiroth in many ways, because she's absolutely the naturalist, and he's kind of this artificial being, and he's this artifice in reality that's trying to assert his dominance over everything. And she's trying to counteract that by listening to the planet, because that's something that she's supposed to be able to do, is speak to the planet. And
she's the connection to the planet.
Right. So she has that connection, and she can feel. She's an empath, so she can feel the planet's pain. So we're really getting into the idea that the planet is a living organism, right? So we have the theme that the planet is a living being, it's an organism, and that it actually experiences the things that we're doing to it. And that for us to survive on this planet, we have to learn to live in homeostasis on the planet. And so the whole theme is that, like us going into absolute materialism, or us trying to play God, is living out of harmony with the planet or with the universe. And so I think that's a really important theme. And I think that's one of the themes that really stuck out to me, as a kid, was like, hey, like we're connected to this giant ball. And even though science tells us it's an inanimate object, it's just this, it's just a piece of dirt, it's just a rock.
The two, the different views that, you have the mechanistic, and then the different one sort of.
Yeah, I think, the organism view, that everything is connected and it's all part of a system that we all work together. And it is a living thing, in a way. So I think that's really important to understand within this. And I know that me and you have talked about this a little bit, but there's and maybe you can bring this up with the ancient wise man that we run into later in the game.
Right. Yes, that was a very interesting part. this character is sort of an old wise man in a village called Cosmo Canyon, I think, and it's the place of origin of this animal, this intelligent animal that they find in the Shinra headquarters in Midgar. It's a sort of lion that was experimented on, and as a result, he developed pretty much human-like intelligent capabilities. And his adoptive family was in this village in Cosmo Canyon where we find this character, the wise man that studies passes his time basically studying the cosmos. So the planets, the movements of the planets and the stars. And it's interesting because he's sort of detached a little bit from sort of ground level awareness, so to speak. His head is a little bit up in the air, and maybe doesn't have his feet on the ground anymore.
Right.
So it's sort of, you have that type of imbalance. And then when the characters go to end up going to this village, they use this airship. He ends up going with them in this airship, and it's interesting what he says then. He said, I was passing a lot of times studying nature and the workings of nature, that I forgot I forgot the beauty of man's ingenuity. So, and I think he says something on the line of that he forgot the smell of machinery. So, and he said, well, I forgot that I actually liked it.
Right. So he's so disconnected from reality by being.
He gets reconnected also with the material world. He was maybe more into what we could call the spiritual world, and he sort of gets connected back to the material. That's kind of equally important. So
right, and that is the process in a way that we all do. Like, we obviously have to have our heads in the cloud and feet firmly on the ground, but when you first start doing this work, you go really high up there, and you do kind of disconnect for a moment, maybe through psychedelics or entheogens or something like this. But one of the things that I find that was very profound is that he holds the ancient wisdom. He holds very ancient wisdom, and it's not, he has like astronomy. He's an astrologist, but it's also astrotheology. Like, he has ancient astrotheological understanding. So he's in a way divinizing the movements of the stars and the movements of them, and correlating them to the human psychology, and it's just really profound, because even though he's disconnected from the material world, he has this really advanced,
higher knowledge.
Yeah, he has higher knowledge, and then he also has that planetarium that they go into, right? Which is like some crazy advanced technology almost, in a way. So he has this. He does have some technology there. It's just, it's really wild, and the planetarium scene was really, really powerful. And yeah, I really love the lion character. His attitude, he can really relate with Cloud, obviously, because he's genetically an experiment, but it's also dealing with his own turmoil and his own journey. Each character has their own journey, kind of. You could even say in a Gnostic theme that it's kind of like a fall from grace, like they've fallen from this level of grace, quote unquote, and then they have to rise up out of that. They've fallen into something, and it might not be their own fault. It's, in like his case, he was obviously experimented on by Hojo, this mad scientist, and Cloud rescues him and Eris. So that was one of the things that happens, is that Cloud and the team has to go and rescue Aerith from Hojo, and in doing so, they release this lion, and he becomes part of the team. So they go to the Shinra building and they rescue both these beings. So yeah, I think it's really important, because that
Yeah, Red 13. It's his name that was given to him. The name that was given to him. I mean, the code basically when he was in the Shinra laboratories.
Right, right, and that kind of leads to that theme that you kind of wanted to bring up, which is like they take these things that already have names or and they label them as something.
Yeah, they
different.
label them with giving them just a number. Living things and beings are just a number, but not just that. What you said, I was talking about the fact that the various neighborhoods or boroughs that form the city of Midgar. They say at a certain point that they all had names, but then the names were abolished and they were given just a number, sector 1, 2, etc.
Right,
sort of
right.
dehumanize and to leave out that more human element.
That's right. Yeah, because when we name things with creative names, that you're right, it gives it a human element and we can relate with it emotionally. And then when we number it, it disconnects that human element, and then we kind of can't relate with that emotionally. It doesn't get us into our right brain or into our heart-based intelligence. So and that's normally what happens when you have crazy elite overlords that are trying to take over the world. They want to disconnect you and get you to disassociate from the things that you're creating and the things that have been created. This is why we often name our cars or our guitars or whatever it might be, these inanimate objects with actual human names, because we're trying to give them some type of fundamental connection for us, to build a fundamental connection for us so that we have an emotional relationship with the thing itself, and that's where I would say the new age movement kind of fails, is that it tries to get you to dehumanize or disconnect. I want to maybe dehumanize isn't the right term, but to disconnect from everything that's material to such a degree that it doesn't matter, that you become apathetic, And for example, when I look at my guitar, let's say I have 7 guitars, or 10 guitars, and I'm only playing 2 or 3 of them. Well, all the other ones I feel really sad about, because they're not getting the love and attention that they need. So I look at them as if they have a spirit and that they have a purpose. And if their purpose is not being fulfilled, then what's the point of me having that thing? So what I would do is probably give it away or sell it or give it to somebody, or sell it to somebody who is going to use that thing. Because what's the purpose of it being in creation if it doesn't get utilized in any way? It just becomes, it's just going to be broken down by entropy, and it's just going to, fundamentally has no meaning besides its own creation. And the creator of it would be very sad, I would hope, that it didn't get used properly. And this is something we see in the Japanese culture and the Eastern cultures, is that the things they create, they respect, they respect those things. So we should respect the things that we create when we create them.
Yeah, very good point. To go back to the mad scientist Hojo, that the name had a resemblance with the General Tojo, the Japanese general during World War II. He went to the trials there obviously for crimes against humanity and war crimes. So he was prime minister, I think, for a time during World War II also. So that was interesting. I thought he was more related with that unit, that Japanese unit that did the experiments on the war prisoners. Doesn't seem like it, but yeah, being prime minister and a general, he was probably probably authorized at some level those activities. So
right,
that's interesting to know.
Yeah,
so the name brought that to my mind.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a really astute find that you've brought up. And I think I've run across that before when I was studying it a little bit more. Another thing I'd like to bring up, we talked about the summons a little bit. Well, another summon was Shiva, right? We do have the Shiva, which is the Hindu goddess. You have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and Shiva is the goddess of destruction or recommencement, you could say. So Brahma is the creative god, and Vishnu is the balancing god, and then Shiva is the one who it's kind of like the fall. Everything's falling or degenerating. It's not necessarily like destroying everything. It's just something that kind of paves the way for rebirth, or reunion in many ways. But it's the ice god too. So Shiva would be symbolized as the south or as winter, So that's why she gets represented with the ice powers in the video game. So there's a lot of other creatures such as Ifrit or Ifrit, the fire summon, which is a Middle Eastern kind of jinn of fire. So we have the Middle Eastern jinn, and this is kind of what it represents when you look deeper into it. And also, I mean, you could look at it as a dragon too. The Baphomet, I think, is one of the dragon names.
Behemoth.
Behemoth.
You have Behemoth and Leviathan and
Leviathan,
and other creatures that actually are, I think they are common throughout many of the games, many of the Final Fantasy games.
Yes, they are. You find most of these summons in all these games. So you collect these summon materials, and then you're capable of using them in battle, obviously. But they're really, really overly powered,
do they have Quetzal, from Quetzalcoatl in Final Fantasy VII, or is it in 8? Because I remember it from 8. But
it's in 8. It's definitely in 8. It's not in 7, but it's definitely in 8. I love that one. And it was a lightning, kind of like etheric bird almost, but it's the feathered serpent is what it is. So that's when I first came in contact with the feathered, with that idea of the feathered serpent from the Mesoamerican cultures. So right. So there's a lot of mythology in ancient themes, and there's also Asian mythological creatures in there too. They got one, I can't remember his name, but he has like the big hat, and like he looks like a samurai pretty much. But you see that there's a lot of overlaps of all these different cultures being mixed together with all the summons. That's one of the most prominent places you could find some of that stuff. That's more exoteric, I would say, but it's definitely there, bordering the esoteric knowledge.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because we are still talking about elemental powers. So and the worship of elemental powers, so that goes quite deep into the esoteric.
Absolutely it does. And a lot of people won't ever use that term, elemental powers, and a lot of people might not understand what that really means. And we could look at that as the elements of nature, and us learning to wield those things from nature, and things that we've spiritualized, which are not that we spiritualize them, they're already spirits, but things that we have kind of divinized, maybe that's a better word for it, to a high extent, when we start to worship these elemental powers, and then we anthropomorphize them, turning them into actual beings. And then
that's when the problems started to.
Yeah,
I guess that's when the problem started. The problem started, I guess.
Yeah, so we take these elemental powers and then we turn them into actual beings, and we start worshiping them as gods. So that's a big issue in our history and where we're at, obviously. So
I think we can go towards the end of the video game. I think there's quite a lot of interesting aspects to point out, even regarding that, and also the very end in particular, which we'll get to that also. And so basically at the end, Sephiroth summons this meteor from outer space that actually could basically to put an end to all life on the planet. That's sort of where we find our heroes. Their sort of their final mission is to stop it, obviously. In the meantime, they are fighting this what they call these weapons. They basically manage to do that, and so they need to get to descend into this crater that's in the north, the northern crater in the planet, to fight Sephiroth, basically, and Genova.
The theme of the meteor strike brings to mind the demiurge, right? So we do have this kind of demiurge theme, which is also kind of Gnostic in many ways. We do find this in a lot of the ancient traditions of like wiping the planet completely clean, right? Kind of like that Shiva force in a way, so that new growth can take place. So it's this idea of the planet killing meteor that brings the great flood, which washes away all of the sins of man, right? And pretty much washes away man himself. And we find this within the Christian theme of Noah's Ark. We find this within all kinds of different traditions. You can look to the ancient Egyptians. You find this in the ancient Egyptian dynastic, not pre-dynastic themes. But I do feel that it's a misnomer a lot of times, but we don't have to get into a lot of that. But it does have that theme, that demiurge theme running through there. And we do kind of see like how this kind of gets propagandized in the media a lot, where we have these great earth-threatening, things that are taking place, and it kind of is used by, like some great volcano that's going to erupt, that's going to destroy all of the beings, or, we see it in the media is my point. We see it in the media all the time. Fear propaganda, right?
Yeah. Fear mongering, yeah.
Yeah, fear mongering, right? So, and we do see that with Shinra using that to their advantage at the end here. And they create these giant weapons, right? So they have these giant weapons like you're talking about, and those are bosses that we have to fight. But they also have these giant cannons that are stationed. They have the one giant cannon that's stationed on the coast of one of the continents. And and it's just like this huge, like overly powered weapon that, nobody should really fucking have, honestly. It's like, well, if they have it, we should fucking have it, obviously. But yeah, and I feel that's kind of important because there's an overarching theme, and I think it comes from the devastation that the Japanese have experienced from, Hiroshima, of like weaponry that's being used against other continents. And we kind of see this with the battle between the West and the East in the whole game. So you have Wutai, I think is what it was. That's where you get Yuffie, one of the other secret characters. She's a secret character in the game. And they are definitely representative of the Eastern people, but they're very traditionary, and they're not locked into that. Like when you go to their cities and stuff, it's not like Midgar. Obviously, it's not very mechanical in that way. But there's a war between the West and the East in the game, and it's kind of like a sub-narrative that's going on, but it's there. If you follow the narrative, there's this giant war that's taking place between these two continents and these two major superpowers.
Yeah, or maybe in the past.
Yeah. There was a war in the past, and it's kind of like it's not in the forefront that it's happening currently, but there is like this struggle that's going on between the two. It's kind of like they just have peace, like ceasefire. They just have ceasefire going on at that point, right? So yeah, that's a big theme that's going on, and then obviously there's a lot that takes place. I believe that Aerith actually like prays to the earth to help the Avalanche crew defeat the meteor, and to defeat Genova. I think one of my dogs is snoring. I don't know what it was. I think she was snoring. But yeah, the Northern Crater thing also is kind of interesting to me because, the North is where we always look to for, Godhead or God or higher enlightenment, or everything that we see as above us we perceive as better, so we always look to the North to be that. And then there's this giant hole in the North kind of representing that disconnect, and that maybe that crater in our own cerebral in a way, in our own neocortex in a way. And or you could look at it as the crown chakra, and there's a crater there. And so I think that there's some underlying symbolism that goes along with it being the North, because if we look at the planet as a brain, then we can see like that's where the damage is done, in the northern pole, of our brain.
And that's where they have to go to get inside there to fight the final battle with Sephiroth. So
Right, right. So you have these two opposing forces. Like one is Sephiroth, which is like the way to heal the planet is by destroying all of humanity, right?
I don't remember. Does he? He's not the one that wants to build something after he destroys everything. He wants just to. He's completely, nihilistic. Like he wants to destroy everything. That's Sephiroth, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yeah, he's just like he wants to reunite himself with everything and make everything one with him. So it's not even that he wants to destroy everything, but you can look at it as destroying everything because he doesn't want anything else to exist besides himself. He wants to become the divine God itself, and then you also have Shinra that's also in the complicated battle between the three. So you have these trifecta. You got Avalanche, you got Shinra, and then you got Sephiroth, who are all battling each other at this time period. And it kind of escalates and, comes to that apex at the end of the game there. And you end up needing to fight Sephiroth at the end, obviously.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting that Shinra at a certain point tries to. I don't remember exactly if they use some weapon on the meteor, but they fail to stop it. So this is left to basically to Aerith's prayer to summon the holy, what they call the holy.
Right.
So
right.
that's what succeeds in destroying it.
Absolutely, and that summoning kind of brings to mind that Christian theme again, the holy, right? So that kind of the prayer, the holy, like it's definitely like a Western Christian theme going on within that, I feel like. So we do see that, and you can look at it as Gnosticism too, maybe Christian Gnosticism in a big way with that. So I would like to point that out because I think this whole game is really just a huge Gnostic Kabbalistic, allegory for healing yourself and in reconnecting with the divine and learning to not only understanding that you have to fight the iniquities of the material realm that's going on and inequities that are going on, but also understanding that there's a spiritual aspect to this and that there's a spiritual war going on that you have to really strive to push forward and heal and bring to the forefront, because it's not just about like the corporate overlords. It's also about our ineptitude to reconnect ourselves with spirit itself. So it's about ourselves coming back and in tune with that. And I think all the characters kind of recognize that because we see Cloud struggle with his own identity. He has dissociative identity disorder pretty much, and at one part in the game he sees multiple selves of himself, right? So it's like multiple personalities all clashing, and then Aerith has to lead him back to his one self, to get him back in tune with himself so that he can overcome this great evil that's attacking the world.
Yeah, he's leaving the memories of this character called Zack Fair, I think. That was Aerith's first, she was in love with this guy basically. He was actually ex-soldier, while we find out that Cloud was just regular, just regular army, regular military.
Yeah, he wasn't actually what he thought he was. His memories were can't remember they were implanted, but I do believe implanted is the best term to use of this guy Zack, and that's why he has these flashbacks where he's in conflict or in places that he actually was never in, and it really was this guy Zack was there. So
it's not really in internal duality. He's even more than duality.
It's almost artificially injected, dissociative identity disorder. Like it's created because he's a genetic experiment from Shinra, pretty much,
But through the sacred feminine, through the caring represented by Aerith, I guess he's internally reunited, brought back into his internal oneness.
Absolutely.
And that's what enables him to fight Sephiroth in the end and defeat him.
Yeah, so at the end, I think it's a big statement against fighting false gods and people who claim to be God. You know, people who want to play God over this world, and it has a solipsistic style of approach to it because we have Sephiroth kind of taking up that idea that he wants to be the one and all, and that nothing else can be created besides the things that he creates. So he espouses this kind of apex of psychopathy in a way. So he evolves into what I said earlier, the seraphim. He transforms into a seraphim, which is the six-winged being, and this is the final boss, and you have to defeat the seraphim, which is like an angel. But it's a false angel. He's a proxy. He's a facsimile of what it actually represents. So I think you could look at that however you like. You could look at it as like an anti-religious statement, like, fuck all false religions as well. Like I could see that in there. There could be like an anti-religious statement there. And that it's just about getting in tune with nature. Like that's the true religion, like getting back in tune with yourself and in nature, which is what, Gnosticism really was espousing in many cases. So I think that's a good, way to look at that allegory.
You also have the track from the score there. That's what was it? The sixth-winged angel or something? I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, that's right. That's in there too.
Yeah, the score is great, by the way.
The score is amazing. Yeah. Oh my God, it sticks out to me so much. Like it still resonates with me to this day. I'll just listen to it every once in a while. I'm like, yeah, this is the shit.
Yeah. Now talking about the very end of the video game, which I think it's quite interesting because it leaves many things open, many interpretations open, and it's basically 500 years later. I mean, the only character that we see at that point is Red 13, the lion, that he went back to his animalistic nature, I guess, or for the most part, and he has his cubs with him, and he goes and they are running. They stop and they look over at Midgar's ruins that they are covered with with plants, with greenery. So basically, nature has taken back all the horror that was that city. Birds fly by, and we see nature has sort of grown back around the place, and we know that the planet has probably healed, but we don't know if the humans are still living, or if they have perished, or if they have sort of moved out from the city, and the city was left abandoned there, and they went into other places, maybe more in harmony with the planet and nature. I think it leaves those two options, those two possibilities open. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're dead on with that. The ending scene is extremely open-ended, and it does kind of imply that almost like you're not really sure if the human race has actually survived or not. But what we are sure is that life is still thriving and life is still living. And and I really like the Red 13 scene with him with his two cubs, and kind of it was really good animation at that time period as well. But it does kind of give the idea that he's found his place in nature. He's returned to his original purpose. He found where he's supposed to be at. And it's like, did we? That's the question. Did we find our place? Have we found our place in nature? And obviously it's not in Midgar. It's not in this super controlled, technocratic, freaking elite, dystopia or cyberpunk city that that they were living in. So I would say I would opt to hope that human beings were living more in tune with nature. But if they didn't, if it was the opposite, that they did die, but they saved the planet, is that worth the risk? Like is that the ultimate goal? Like, would we sacrifice ourselves to save all the life on the planet, or are we so, selfish that we see ourselves as more important, than all that? That is a big question. Like, could we sacrifice ourselves to keep the planet alive or to keep the animal kingdom alive? I think a lot of people would struggle with that because we have a over value of our self-importance. And I think we have a place here. We have a purpose to help protect this place, And that's kind of the theme in the game too, is like, hey, this is kind of our purpose at one level, is to protect the planet and protect, the animal kingdom, obviously. So that is a big theme and big narrative of the whole game, is being protectors of that which cannot protect itself,
Yes, yeah. I love the ending of the game. And yeah, I tend to think that it's probably more towards human, surviving, because some of them actually saved the planet.
We would hope.
We would hope that they survived and lived more in tune with the, with their world. But it's probably something that has been left open, or maybe even on purpose. Who knows? Because that whole situation is still open in real life. It's still an open possibility in real life. Will we perish for not being aligned the laws of nature and morality, basically, or will we, finally comprehend them and start living according to those? The choice is ours. So
that's right. The choice is ours. One more thing I'd like to point out with the environmentalism is that we see ourselves as the enemy of the planet, right? So we have to kill ourselves off, to save the planet. So that's also the dark side of that, is like, the only way to save the planet is by the human race going extinct, Yeah. And I think that's a very, very bad place to be, to kind of give a little oppositional idea of what I just, what I said earlier. The planet's going to be here whether we're here or not, like it's a lot stronger than what we give it credit for. So, but our choice is to, will we steward it? Will we live in harmony with the laws of nature? And will we make a difference? Are we going to actually make a difference to create a better society that lives in homeostasis with nature? And that's I think an overarching theme in a lot of games. Is like, what are we doing? What are we doing with ourselves, and why aren't we doing this?
Yeah. So, man, this has been a very interesting conversation. We went all over the place as far as the game goes, because it's a very long game. Like I don't know how many how much time it takes to finish it. I know by watching the the gameplay on YouTube, I see that's maybe like 35 hours. A lot to say about it. Maybe we wouldn't possibly cover it all in a single conversation, but it was very interesting, and that's a great game. And yeah, that said, I think we can close this episode for today. So I don't know, Brandon, do you have any final words, or do you want to say where people can find your work before closing here?
Yeah, I would like to say that if you're interested in checking out more allegories on this game, I would recommend just doing some quick searches online, because there's a lot of people who have broken this game down in many different ways, and you'll find a lot more of the intricate detail about the meanings and the philosophies and the mythologies and all that stuff. So if you're interested, dig into it. And there's no way, like he said, there's no way that we could have covered everything in the game. So I hope that you pulled something out of it. I hope you gained something from it and enjoyed this episode. You can find my work at seedtruth.com. I have tons of presentations, essays, and podcasts up there. I try to keep it pretty up to date. So you can just follow me on there. You can also find me at the One Great Work Network page, which is onegreatworknetwork.com. And you can go to content, the content tab, and then find my name, Brandon Martin, under that. I'm also on YouTube under Seed Truth Academy, and I'm on BitChute and Odyssey under the same name. So thanks for having me, man. It's such a pleasure to get on here. I've been looking forward to doing a talk like this for a long time. So I was a little scatterbrained. I'm sorry about that. a little tired this morning, but I think we did pretty well, honestly.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a great conversation, and yeah, thanks again. And hopefully we'll do another one of these in the future. And yeah, stay tuned for that, and see everybody next time.